So the one thing I regret after all these years is we should have been taking notes of everything that this panel has said. Think about what has happened over 21 years in the world, in this country, in the city, and we just could have seen the evolution of that just with this panel and them speaking. It's quite amazing. I'm going to take a little risk here. I'm sort of looking at the audience and seeing if anyone strange is here. Any hoodies, any backpacks?
That was
anything
last
like
year.
that. Oh, is anyone? No. Susan, is anyone strange sitting at your table? My wife? No, she was terrified last year. She told me, by the way, she would not ever come again after last year. So, Steve, you authorized me to ask this question, and I will. You know, what happened since last year when we had, some protesters getting up and we found that after they were plants by the labor unions and there was a big demonstration outside. So I hear there's some pretty good news since last year and what has been accomplished by related and regarding that.
Well, since that disturbance last year, which was a result of a lawsuit that we had filed against the building trades, through REBNY, we've settled that lawsuit, and I think to everybody's benefit, really one of the great, what will hopefully be one of the great untold stories is how that really impacts New York and results in really driving down the cost of construction in New York. We were able to settle that lawsuit with Gary LaBarba, who's head of the building trades. His leadership, was extreme. He really represents 26 different unions, and getting them all on the same page is a very, very difficult thing. And it's really, really caused New York to have such high construction costs. And I'm happy to say now, New York is really kind of an open shop city for the first time. And I think that the impact of that will be felt, in the years to come. So that disturbance was worthwhile last year.
Absolutely. So, I'm glad we're all here again. I'm sure many people were concerned. We also have more security this year, so.
Hey, Rob, can I just say?
Go ahead.
So as the chairman of REBNY, this was been a priority for us. And obviously, I don't think anybody would have sat here a year ago and thought that we would be where we are today. So I think a lot of credit goes to Steve and to his partner, Bruce Beal, and to Jim Whalen of REBNY, and we had a small committee related, I think really led the way, and we all know in business that sometimes there's got to be some tumult before everybody can get to the table and roll up their sleeves. And obviously Gary LaBarbera and his members, had to come a long way also to have this dialogue. So, after Related made their deal, that opened the door for REBNY to sit down, and we've structured a deal that we announced, I think, a couple of weeks ago. That's a framework, a two-pronged attack to, one, create committees to work out the economics and the structure of how owners, such as ourselves and other people in the room, can negotiate with the building trades to get their prices and their work rules to be more competitive. We know it's not going to go to zero, but I think we all prefer to work with union labor. And so that's track one. Track two was also to, and we'll get into this in terms of Larry talked about the city and the direction our political leadership is going, and to create a dynamics that real estate and the construction union can work together on a pro-growth policies and try to influence the direction that our city and state is going. So this is a historic deal that is unprecedented, and I think we're very proud of what we've done. Now we have to sort of implement it, but from where we were a year ago to where we are today is really is phenomenal.
Let me focus on two interesting topics which are really hot right now, and it's we was or we work, and
We was.
and the other one is regarding the real serious situation of the growing gulf between the haves and have-nots, and the role of the progressives implementing policy, which is definitely going to affect the ability to provide housing for all New Yorkers. Very serious topic. So let's start with the second one, Maryanne, and really focus on, you're in the development business, you've built housing. I know others will want to jump in this one, but what can government do to bring us back to a point where we incentivize you developers to actually build housing again?
Sure. Well, I first want to start by thanking Steve and saying that you cannot really overstate the importance of harmony with the unions and the ability to build open shop. You know, there's this timid conversation that we all used to have about the use of open shop and open bidding, and the absence of an ability to be certain that you wouldn't have a rat or a local politician upset about that is real problematic in our business. And now we can have a conversation where the building trades are completely on board with this idea that as long as everybody gets an opportunity to bid, that kind of level playing field is extraordinarily helpful for keeping construction pricing at a place where we can build. And the revamping of 421A helped us with that on the housing side. But you know, we would go in and talk to landowners, and there was this fear of doing something that made economic sense because it would be a political disaster. And those days are gone. And we have Steve and Related to thank for that. And it's very, very important for this city to be able to grow. As it relates to residential and multifamily, it was a disastrous year. There were 2 weeks in the year where we weren't certain we could build brand new ground up multifamily construction because the only way to build affordable housing in this city is to let the market rate housing subsidize that affordable housing. And after we got completely, we had this chilling effect with 421A when there was no deal. We finally made the deal and found ourselves waking up to legislation that effectively allowed all of the market rate housing to be capped. And right now, if your units are bringing in over $2,700 a foot, $2,700 a month in rent, they are unregulated. And why is that important? They're market rate units, and if they're capped, there's absolutely no way to make the economics subsidize the affordable housing. And so for a period of time, based on what Albany did, that part of it was, I think, purely accidental and sloppy on the part of the legislators. The new builders in the city had no mandate to build affordable housing because you cannot build the affordable housing without the tax deal. The tax deal didn't work because the new legislation capped the market rate housing. So that was a disaster. It went on, I want to say it went on for less than a month, right, Bill? But it got corrected, and correcting that meant that if you're building in affluent areas and you can clear that monthly rent number, you're in good shape. But the truth of the matter is, in most every corner of the city, that's a very high monthly rent, $2,700 a month for a rental unit. So we are still in a situation where there's going to be a cap on how much housing is built in the city. There simply are not the ingredients available to us as builders to build with the construction costs where we find them and the rents where they sit and the subsidies in place which cap our ability to grow. So there's a problem with new construction, and then I would say for those investors that bought existing portfolios in the boroughs and they were great coupon clippers year over year, that's changed dramatically because you do not get proper credit for investments in the building, and you can't grow the rents. So what has to happen? There has to be a reckoning. And I fear that given the political environment, it's going to take the uglier side of the consequences of that legislation to rear their ugly heads for the government officials to understand what they've done. And obviously groups like REBNY are hard at work, but there's a long-term impact of this legislation, and there has to be audacity and guts and a willingness to recognize it's a problem, and I don't see that presently in Albany.
Yeah, Scott, you have multiple roles. One, you are chairman of RXR, but you're also the chairman of the Regional Plan Association, which is a huge advocate to bridge the gap between the have and have-nots, and housing and new construction being a big part of that, and part of the RPA's, Regional Plan Association's policy and what you do as a business. How are you seeing the effect of this gap between various political factions, and telling us how to do things in the real estate industry?
Yeah, so I would just want to actually add words of caution on the congratulatory part about having open shop. Because I think, as Steve would know, we're fortunate that Gary the Barber is someone that is commercial, and he knows that if we don't find a win-win environment where you can actually bring prices down to a reasonable point where you can hire union labor local union labor, you actually can't build, and so there won't be work. But there's a number of trades and unions that aren't as reasonable, and I think we're dealing in a environment in Albany right now that is really being driven by ideological zeal, and not necessarily practical thoughts in terms of policy. And I think Maryanne gave a good description of some of the challenges with the housing legislation. There was many more issues that still live on in that rent regulation legislation that I think is going to impede our ability to create good, affordable, high-quality housing, where if they're not going to incent owners to actually reinvest capital into units when people move out, they'll deteriorate, and we'll be in situations where good middle-class housing, like we began to see at Stuytown and other places, will end up falling into the same problems that we're seeing at NYCHA and other public housing, where there'll be really bad conditions and not good for the people living there, or the neighborhood, or our city at large. And so going into this next legislative session, I'm concerned that this prevailing wage flag is still going to be waved hard, and there's not going to be people that understand this is a really nuanced issue. And I think what's interesting is they're all connected, right? At the end of the day, we want to pay people living wages. We want to hire locally. We want to have diversity. We want to give people equality of opportunity. We want to have people to have affordability of housing. We want to have people to be able to get to and from their jobs and public transportation. But everything's a give and take. And so if you say that prevailing wage means everything needs to be 100% union labor, then that means you can't build affordable housing. And or if you put in, say we don't want to have density in our community, then once again you can't build the right level of affordable housing. Or this past year we did pass the congestion pricing bill, which was something that a lot of us have been actively engaged in, which is the first in this country, which is going to create meaningful amounts of dollars to reinvest in our public transportation system and rebuilding the subway system, which is a great feat, but that comes with, again, trade-offs along the way, and we all have to be prepared for that. So I'm anxious, to be honest with you, of what's happening in Albany, and I think from most of, at least, I don't know, maybe Larry had a different period, but at least most of us, I don't think we've ever operated in such an anti-business, anti-real estate environment before. I mean, you listen to the accomplishments that you were talking about, or that Sam was, about what Larry's done, what a lot of people in our industry have done to actually build this city and the communities in which we live, and yet we're talked about by the activist as the enemy. So if you think about Occupy Wall Street after the banks collapse, we're that today. Real estate's that today. And that's a tough place to be. And it's not something that you can change overnight. It means it's a lot of communication, because what has happened more broadly is people don't want to have communication. The far left and the far right, they want to hear what they have to say. They want to be extreme. And if you try to have a conversation discourse, they're not going to listen. And so it's hard to penetrate. And so it becomes a very difficult process. And so I think that this is going to be, I'm worried, is the long answer.
I'm gonna have
Those forces that kept Amazon out are still very active.
Right.
And really the prevailing thought is coming out of Albany, which is very scary for the growth in New York.
Right. When you think about it, here last year, right, Steve had those protests, which is the first time we've seen something like that popping up and disturbing a conversation. And rather than having, again, constructive dialogue for real concerns, right, they had real concerns, it was just a protest to disrupt. And then, by the way, a year ago today, they announced Amazon coming to New York City, and then Valentine's Day, Amazon leaves, and all that did really was engender a sense of that far extreme, a sense of power, and that this is the model that's going to work. And it's going to, these are complex challenges, and you need to really sit down and have discussions about them to try to find nuanced answers to get there.
Yeah, I think,
Sure.
go ahead.
Just to add to what Maryanne was saying, I learned how to build affordable housing when I worked for Steve Ross in the late 80s. And we really had three tools back then. We had federal, local, and state benefits. So we had federal low-income housing tax credits, we had 421 tax abatement, and we had tax-exempt financing, all which helped produce 20% affordable units in all of the market rate jobs we built. And today, we have a great 421A program, but it's really tough to get the tax-exempt bonds, and the low-income housing tax credits don't do what they used to do. Plus, land prices have gone way up in construction costs, so it's really tough to make any numbers pencil for affordable housing in New York City. it makes more sense in the suburbs. So we really need to bring some of those programs back. And that's before you bring in the change to rent regulations and prevailing wage.
Let's change it up a little bit and go back to the WeWork discussion in a positive way. We had a speakers dinner yesterday, and the consensus was that they were clearly an issue now in terms of financial issues, but clearly a market leader and a leader that's changed the dynamic of office use in the city. And this is not going away. That was the consensus. It's only going to get bigger. We talk about rentals. The corporate America wants a short-term rental. They want flexibility. They want to be able to change. And I think, we just discussed what the impact of this one company, probably reducing their scope, but on the other side, the industry expanding. So who is better to talk about that than you, Bill, who's taken the risk in building in the outer boroughs and probably built an unbelievable property in the Navy Yards, and you do have any concern regarding this? And the other half of the question for others, do you as owners have concern that what is the impact on the office market in New York City with the potential decline of this major tenant?
Well, I'm going to answer that part first because, a month ago when WeWork, or 6 weeks ago when WeWork ran into their issues, every day on the news was a reporter standing in front of a WeWork building saying they're going to go out of business and they're going to impact the New York City real estate market and the world's coming to an end and whatever. And I quickly did the analysis. They've got 7 million feet. The Manhattan market just alone is about 5 or 550 million feet. So it's about 1% of the marketplace. So if they evaporated overnight, can we absorb a loss of 7 million feet? A catastrophic event is when we were downtown in the 90s and we had 30 million feet of space. Larry and many of us lived through that period of time. That was not a fun period. But to absorb 7 million feet, I don't think would have been the end of the world. And they're not going out of business. Are they going to pull back? Are they going to slow their growth? Are they going to give some space back? Probably. But the business model is validated. What is Silverstein Properties doing? What is Durst doing? What is Tishman Speyer doing? I'm not sure, Scott, are you doing it? But they're all going into the co-work flex business because that, as you said, is here to stay. Tenants want that flexibility. And what we did in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, they were the ones who sourced the deal. They brought us in to develop the building. They've moved in.
Well, it's you and Boston Properties.
It's us, Boston Properties, and WeWork is a major tenant. And we actually, CBRE did a report a year ago called the Agile Office Building, which is part flex, part short-term space, and part long-term space, fully amenitized. And so we designed this building 5 years ago before that report came out, and I think everybody in this panel is doing that today. They are building buildings that are office buildings that are fully amenitized, because that's what tenants want to attract and retain talent. And they're creating this flex model and all these amenities so that the tenants can show their prospective employees what they've created. So I'm not worried. Obviously WeWork's going to have to work through their issues, and SoftBank has a lot of money in there, and they'll bring in a new CEO, or they're going to figure it out. But flex space, co-working space is here to stay, and it's an important part of our ecosystem. The problem was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, small companies couldn't find space. They didn't want to sign a 5-year lease or a 10-year lease with us. Too much brain damage. So WeWork and others, smart, filled that niche, and I think that niche is going to continue to grow and be an important part of our market.
Another dynamic that we find when we're leasing space at the World Trade Center is that we didn't find 3 years ago is that the tenants are asking us, is there co-working space in the building? Yeah. Because if you're a law firm and you take 300,000 square feet and all of a sudden you got a big case and you got to bring in 20 lawyers from Dallas, where do they sit? And they want swing space that's temporary. They don't have to take on permanent space. If you're an advertising agency and all of a sudden you get the Pepsi account for 6 months, you got to put your people somewhere. So the first question they ask us is there co-working space in the building? And we never saw that 3 years ago.
Yeah, Scott, you've been a leader, and also Steve, I'd like to hear what you're doing in Hudson Yards regarding this, in really overlaying technology and other sharing businesses or prop tech businesses, especially at 75 Rock. How do you see this WeWork change, and does it really matter because you're involved in so many other exciting sharing technologies?
Yeah, so,
Steve, what are you going to do? What are you doing in Hudson Yards regarding this after?
So I would just reiterate the point that I think that the concept of of people wanting flexible, fully curated space that they can procure with the phone call versus multiple vendors is here to stay, and it's an important part of the marketplace. And I also agree. I think WeWork deserves credit for identifying that market. But I think there are two things that we got to focus on the cautious side, right? One is in the near term. Irrespective, let's assume that WeWork does figure out and their own circumstances and continues as a going concern. But even irrespective of that, WeWork and all of their peers and the landlords and the users of flexible workspace are all taking a step back, a pause to let the dust settle and just to see where things fall, right? And so there's going to be, in the next coming quarters, where over the past quarters we've seen 20-25% of the leasing activity related to flexible workspace or co-working space type users. I think you'll see precipitous drops of that activity over the next 2-3 quarters while things play themselves out. So that's in the near term, irrespective.
I think that's healthy. I mean,
I'm not saying it's not healthy. I'm just making the comment. And then I think the next sort of thing to watch, in my opinion, is 2-3 years from now, when those short-term leases start rolling off. And the question you have to ask yourself is, when they were signed, were they priced at a level where the company that was signing that lease can actually make a profit? And if they were subsidized, that pricing by VC funding that was focused on growth versus profitability, and I'm not just pointing WeWork, I think this is across the whole spectrum, that pricing may need to adjust. And then the question is, when it adjusts, does it adjust at a level where still the user is willing to pay the price that they were paying, that higher price for that flexibility? And I'm not sure we know where that market is, and so I think there's another second iteration of this as those users short-term leases start coming up, where we're going to have to refine where that market is.
Steve,
Well, I think we're going to have a recession at some point, and it's seeing if these companies that are in those short-term spaces that are not really highly capitalized, to say the least, are able to survive, and what will happen with that short-term space. So I think you can't be all optimistic and just waiting for those leases to expire. You got to worry about the economy.
Well, I'll differentiate this. I think it's fair to say I was talking to more flexible office space, which are more traditional, financially strong buildings, not necessarily co-working, which I guess is maybe somewhere 40
The buildings
50%.
will be fine. It's the question that.
Yeah, but I view the shared economy, we'll talk about that in the workshop, it's much more than office space. It's residential, it's staying over like your Airbnb situation. It's all, the shared economy is much broader than just office space. But I agree with Steve that certainly is going to be an issue. And we all lived through this. In fact, Bill, I remember living through this with you in your downtown property where we thought it would be perfect.
Well, I guess, and I think Steve's a little being modest, but, on the other side of the equation, he just signed today the largest lease probably in New York in decades with Facebook.
Look at you today. Look at you.
And,
Dealing with the union, signing largest lease.
But the
He's
good
got the Dolphins.
Tech's
to play
not
for.
dead,
The Dolphins to play for.
Tech's not dead. New York's not dead. In spite of our discussions over the last 20 plus years about, will we survive 9/11? Will we survive Sandy? Will we survive, the financial crisis? Will we survive? Every few years we have like a major crisis. But the good news on the Facebook deal is they're taking $1.5 million with Steve. Oh, and guess what? They're keeping their existing almost 1 million square feet at 770 Broadway and on Park Avenue South. So this is like net absorption, times 3, which is, I think, an incredible message for our city.
And they still have more space to take in New York.
Oh, I'm sure.
There'll be another lease to announce.
Deutsche Bank has some space for you in their new headquarters. So.
Thank you. Welcome.
Maryanne, let's talk about tech again, but you are very active in Long Island City right now.
Yeah,
And so the issue is, Amazon was going to go there. It's not going there. Can we bring tech or other users back to the places like where Amazon was going to go to support growth not only in Manhattan, but in the outer boroughs?
Look, while the political calculus around Amazon was off and wrong in so many ways, the economic and location analysis was spot on. So we, last year, were in negotiations to partner with a large landowner in Long Island City and shook hands on that site on Valentine's Day when Amazon, about 2 hours after Amazon pulled out. It's right adjacent to TF Cornerstone and Plaxel's properties. And so for the last year, we have been working on a district-wide innovation district on Long Island City's waterfront. And in many ways, it's informed by what happened with Amazon, which is that it was a single user who kind of just landed on the waterfront, and the government supported it, but didn't really put roots in the community to socialize it and include the community early on. So I think that the lessons learned have helped us go back to Long Island City and say, what has to be different? And so for the last year, we've been working with the government, the council and the city of New York on a district-wide innovation plan for the waterfront. So it's developers working together, it's bringing the community in early, it's looking at 28 acres and saying what could be here. And fundamentally, I think it gets to this issue of what does New York City need? The large floor plates, there are only 15 buildings in New York City that offer 100,000 square feet or greater floor plates, and they're all taken. So I think if you have land on the waterfront in Long Island City that can provide very large floor plates, and you can build high-performing commercial buildings in and around that location, which is well served by mass transit, and great talent lives in and around the area, you've got something. But you still have to focus on resiliency, because the waterfront is not ready for the next storm. You have to focus on the community and the fact that the open space is critical, that the community benefits are critical, that Queensbridge Houses has 10,000 people living there, and you can't turn your back on public housing. And so we're trying, again, as a former public developer, going into a private development and looking at those important ingredients and recognizing that the community has a place at the table, and it has to be early and often. And so I'm bullish on Long Island City. I don't think it's an overnight success. I think as long as the REAP program, the real estate tax incentives, and all the fundamental programs which Amazon was taking advantage of are still in place, and that means that Albany has to function. Because if you get rid of the REAP and you get rid of the real estate tax abatements, you're dead in the water. There's no way you could build a brand new building in Queens and have it compete with Hudson Yards. The fact of the matter is it costs exactly the same amount of money. It costs the same amount of money to build in Queens.
Well,
as it does.
they've already leased his space, so I wouldn't worry about it.
We got more.
We competed,
Marty,
we
go ahead.
competed against Maryanne on that. She won, obviously. But the competition was before Amazon had made its announcement they were going there. So we were all interested in the site pre-Amazon. And then once Maryanne won and Amazon was announced, she looked like a genius. And we'd still love that site today, so good luck with it.
Thank you.
Yeah, Marty, you have, I want to see it in my lifetime, but I'm sure it will happen, that you have one of the last development sites left in Lower Manhattan. And does New York City need another large office tower? And I know many of you, some of you on this panel are competing for the 5 World Trade Center site, which, by the way, was our former headquarters, which was stabbed by the South Tower in 9/11. I was there, and that's a great site. It's a former BT, Bankers Trust, and then the Deutsche Bank building is up for grabs. But where's the user going to come from? Do we need another large office tower in Manhattan?
So as Larry was tabulating what Steve's built and what L&L's built and what Brookfield and we built, and you get to $25 million square feet, and you think about our office stock, which is now over 500 million square feet, it's just a drop in the bucket. And for New York to compete globally, if you think of all of our global companies, whether it's Ernst & Young or Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, or any of the banks, and their employees go off to their offices in London or Beijing or Sydney, and they see these beautiful new office buildings, because most of those cities have rebuilt all their office stock. And then they come back to New York to their old drab buildings. For New York to compete globally, we have to build new buildings. And the proof's in the pudding, because we've leased, as Larry said, 9 million square feet, and Stephen's leased 11 million square feet, and that stuff is going at pretty high prices. So there's surely is a requirement for new space in New York.
Steve, do you see yourself?
Well, we have additional sites, but I totally agree with Marty. If you look and see that of the office stock in New York, the obsolescence of many of those buildings, and it wasn't other than probably Amazon, which was really a net increase in the amount of space they took. It was really shifting of space, of locations for the existing tenants, because they wanted modern buildings, and they need that as a recruitment tool to really attracting people to wanting to work in them, as well as being efficient. So, I think there's a good future for the development of offices in New York in well-located places. And I think, hopefully we'll get some, net inflow as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be more and more, by the way. Just, the thesis for all of this is that New York's a magnet for talent, and that becomes sort of a self-reinforcing cycle, because the more talents that are here, the more of these different companies come, more companies want to come. And when you look around, why did Amazon even choose New York? Because if you look around the other parts around the country, there's no other market that has this level of depth of talents, this scale that you can build. Once you plant yourself as going to be, whether it's your second headquarters or an outpost or from Spotify coming from Europe, you want to have enough that you can continue to build and put more and more of your operations, which means you need to have enough space capacity and people capacity to do it. San Francisco doesn't have it, Seattle doesn't have it. These are tiny markets compared to what New York ultimately has. So, and the rents are proving it out, where you're getting 50% plus premiums on new products. So this, I think, has been, I think this is an example of good public planning and positioning New York when they started this back Hudson Yards, and then unfortunately by default at the Trade Center, but planning for what the future would be to make New York attractive, to be able to bring those types of companies in and attract that talent. And now the affordable housing piece is what we got to, and infrastructure's got to catch up to it to be able to continue to sustain this.
I think we're doing a good job of bringing in those new companies, the tech companies, and their expansion in New York. What scares me, though, is the fact the amount of people, the existing companies, the financial firms, and seeing what New York, has done with, and the federal government's done with the elimination of SALT, and you see such an impact of people wanting to move to Florida, and what impact that'll have on our office economy with our existing tenants, existing corporations, and private equity firms.
There's 3 of us older guys here are going to move to Florida. I'm not sure.
I'm not.
But it's really exciting to see. Facebook is going to bring, what, 6,000, 7,000 new people. Amazon's eventually going to do something in the city and bring another 4,000 or 5,000 people. We signed Spotify and
Well, you look
Uber.
at Google's doing at the same
Google,
time. And,
Spotify and Uber had, each about 400 employees in the city. We signed at least with each of them. They're both going to be over 2,000 people. That's all net additive to New York City.
Bill, the theme of this conference is prop tech and the shared economy, and you have a lot of experience in tech, data, analytics. How important is this prop tech process truly in new development? You as an owner, you just built probably a very high-tech building. And where do you see that going?
Well, I think it's critical, and I think we're all adapting our businesses and getting more data. We created a separate business based on an operating system, the first, well, we think the first ever, but I'm sure there are some other competitors out there, but we think the best building operating system that literally our building engineers can monitor off their iPhones or iPads the amount of people in the building, electrical consumption, water consumption, CO2 levels, handle the hot and cold complaints, drive down our electrical costs, because we then, as the population, used to be when we started our buildings, it was 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning. Now we can, based on machine learning algorithms and real-time data, we can adjust the start times. We know at lunchtime the population starts dropping, and we know, about 1:30 the population starts going up, and we know on Friday afternoons at about 1 o'clock the population drops and they don't come back. And so we modulate our fan speeds, save about 10 to 15%, in some places 20% of operating costs, and we all have to comply with local law, whatever the number is, the Green New Deal, and so the requirements on our buildings and meeting certain standards of energy efficiency are going to increase exponentially, and we need the technology and the data to do that, and our system, Nantum, does that. Plus, there are other...
You just change your heating in your buildings by your iPhone?
Not yet, but but there are other technologies that we're all using, that are I think are making our teams more productive, and I think that's a huge wave of the future in terms of us being able to operate our buildings more efficiently, having the data, having the information, producing our products in a much more efficient and cost-effective way, and that's definitely part of the future.
Yeah, I think
While this is really helpful on the operational side, we're also using it on the tenant side. So we're communicating on the tenants when they walk in the building. There's an agenda of what's happening in that building day. There's a yoga class, there's a concert. They can get discounts at these stores. And then we can track them and see what they're doing and how much they're using these amenities that we're giving them. So
Yeah, I know we could talk for a long time, but I'm being told by the dean that we're running out of time.
Oh, sorry.
So I don't want to, my favorite question, and I always do this. You know, you get up in the morning and you're about to go to work. And I want to know what really drives you, gets you excited, other than being able to sign the largest lease that exists.
Sign another one.
So when you get up in the morning, what really drives you to get excited to do your job? And the second thing, and we always say this, you know, when you go to sleep, you know, what wakes you up at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the evening?
You don't want to know.
I know, you don't want to know. But what gets you excited, and then what worries you? So, Bill, quickly.
Well, I think when I get up and I think about my family and my grandchildren and continuing creating the framework and the platform.
I have about to have 5. You only have 4.
I've got 3, but it's, as you and I know, it's the greatest job in the world. So, you know, continuing for our family legacy, and so that my kids can take over the business. And what keeps me up at night is the things that we talked about, the political environment, the fact that we are every day being attacked in the media and in the political world. But again, as Larry and Steve and many of us have been around the block a few times, this comes in cycles. And back in the 70s, nobody wanted to be in New York City, and a group of people like Larry and my father and others stood up and said, we're gonna push back and we're gonna fight. And many of you in the room don't even know what it was like in the 70s here. You couldn't walk down the street. It was dirty. It was crime-ridden. The transportation wasn't working. And with all of our problems, okay, and we have a lot, this city is still the best city in the world. So I worry about that, but I also feel positive that we smart people like ourselves up here and people in this room and at NYU, we will, the truth will come through, and we'll be able to keep our city moving and reaffirm by Facebook, taking 2 million feet of space here.
I know Marty gets up at Soul Cycle.
No.
3 sessions.
For me, it's
Marty just left
Three sessions.
the Rudin family after how many years were you a tenant?
8.
8
Okay,
years.
so quickly, Marty.
So
what-
real
Sorry,
quickly,
what gets you
very
going
simple.
in the morning?
It's
and what's-
this guy right here. I get up thinking about Larry and the inspiration, and look, he created this institution. He's just an amazing inspiration to me. And what keeps me up at night is all the things I promised him I was going to do that I didn't get to.
Maryanne?
So I think it's the same answer. It's people. It's the people I love and that my friends and family and also my team. I mean, you do great things by having great people. And so I'm fortunate to have some of the most talented and devoted people. So I really show for them. And then what I worry about is really as a mother and as a citizen is the assault on the rule of law and freedom of speech.
I mean, I think, again, consistent theme, right? It comes down to people, to getting up charged to try to make our communities stronger places, make our companies stronger. And also, what I think is really interesting is that we are in extraordinarily rapidly changing times. And so that's really exciting because it gives more opportunity, but it's also what keeps me awake at night, which is those that things are changing extraordinarily at a rapid pace. And so what was true,
Keep up, yeah.
right, what was true today is not going to be true tomorrow, and so having to adapt to that.
Steve?
No, I agree with all the above. But I mean, I really look forward. Today, things are changing at a pace, as Scott has just said, and this isn't just a cycle. We're transitioning into a totally new economy in the way we live and work. And I think that trying to really have the vision to see where we're going and understand it and how to plan and take advantage of this transition that is occurring, because we're not going back to where we were. And I think these are exciting times, and I think too many people in the reaction what's going on in the world today, people really are kind of scared of these times, and that's why I think a lot of the divisiveness that occurs in this country is happening, and I think it's really, we have to bring the country together, we have to really set forth and understand, the people should understand where we're going as a country and not be scared of it and take advantage of change, because change is the greatest thing in the world, because it really adds really life and it allows you to look forward, not backwards.
It's unbelievable that we have this panel here. I don't realize the power of this panel and the depth of experience. I'm in awe. I'm always in awe doing this panel. I really want to thank you
Thank you.
for joining us
Can I
today.
say one last thing?
Great.
I have to say, we said this last night, but it was a much smaller group. Everything you're experiencing here today, this guy had his touch on. So this is his baby.